first time my card didn't work, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I'd spent most of my life learning how to laugh when something felt off. It was a small cafe downtown, the kind with cloth napkins and menus you have to squint at. My daughter-in-law had chosen it. A quick lunch, she said, our treat. She said that last part brightly, like a ribbon tied on top. When the waiter came back, he leaned in and spoke softly. I could hear it anyway. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It was declined." I reached for my purse again, calm as could be. "Try this one." Declined. My daughter-in-law rolled her eyes, not even trying to hide it. My son chuckled, the way he does when he thinks something is mildly embarrassing, but not worth fixing. I felt heat rise in my neck, not anger yet. Recognition. I knew that look. We left the cafe with awkward smiles and empty stomachs. Outside, my daughter-in-law muttered something under her breath that she thought I couldn't hear. I heard every word. It wasn't the first time money had drawn a strange line between us. Ever since my husband passed, things had slowly shifted. Bills I used to pay just this once became expected. Little charges here and there, subscriptions, lunches, weekend getaways I wasn't invited on, but somehow funded. "You're so organized with finances," my son used to say. "You don't really need much," my daughter-in-law added once, smiling. I believed them, or maybe I wanted to. That afternoon, I went home and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. The house was quiet, too quiet sometimes. I thought about the way my husband used to balance the checkbook at this same table, humming off-key, always double-checking everything. "Money isn't love," he'd say, "but it sure reveals where love's been hiding." I hadn't listened closely enough. I opened my laptop. Not in a rush, not with drama. I simply logged in and looked. And there it was, laid out neatly. Patterns, not accidents. Assumptions, not requests. I didn't cry. Instead, I felt something settle in me. A calm I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes when you finally understand what's been happening and what you're going to do about it. I made a cup of tea. Let it steep properly. Took my time. That evening, my phone buzzed. A group message lit up with laughing emojis and a joke about how mom's cards are finally acting their age. My son added a laughing face. I didn't reply. The next morning, I woke early. The sun hadn't fully come up yet. I stood at the window and watched the street come alive. Delivery trucks, joggers, the world continuing on just fine without my constant contributions. I picked up my phone and made a few calls. Quiet ones, efficient ones, no speeches, no confrontations, no warnings. By noon, I was back at my kitchen table, tea gone cold, feeling lighter than I had in years. I had no idea how quickly they'd notice. But I knew this much. The laughter wouldn't last past lunchtime. The silence lasted exactly 3 hours. That's how long it took before my phone began to buzz, not with concern, but confusion. First, a missed call from my son. Then, a text that tried to sound casual. "Hey, Mom, quick question. Did you change something with the accounts?" I read it once, then again. I noticed what it didn't say. No, are you okay? No, sorry about yesterday. Just a question, asked the way you ask when something you rely on suddenly stops working. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I carried my tea into the living room and sat in my husband's old chair. It still creaked when I leaned back. I ran my hand along the worn armrest and remembered how many evenings we'd spent there, talking about our son's future. College, work, marriage. We'd wanted him to have an easier life than we did. Somewhere along the way, easier had turned into entitled. My phone buzzed again. This time, a call. I let it ring. I wasn't being cruel. I was being careful. There's a difference you only learn after years of being too available. When I finally did respond, I kept it simple. I reviewed my finances this morning. That was it. A minute passed, then two. Then my phone rang again, immediately this time. "Mom," my son said the moment I answered, his voice tighter now. "We're out at lunch, and none of the cards are going through. People are starting to stare." I closed my eyes. I could picture it perfectly, the restaurant, the shifting in seats, the quiet embarrassment. A scene I knew too well. "I'm sorry you're uncomfortable," I said evenly. There was a pause. "So you did block them?" "I secured my accounts," I replied. "Yes." He lowered his voice. "Why would you do that without telling us?" I looked around my living room, the framed photos, the little plant I kept alive out of sheer stubbornness, the stack of bills I'd always handled without complaint. "Why would you use them without asking?" I asked gently. Silence. In the background, I heard my daughter-in-law's voice, sharp, impatient. "What's taking so long?" My son covered the phone, then quieter. "This isn't the time for this." I felt something stir in my chest, not anger, not triumph, clarity. "It became the time when you laughed," I said, "and when you assumed." He exhaled hard. "So what are we supposed to do?" That question, "what are we supposed to do?" had followed me my whole life. It was always asked of me, never by me. "I trust you'll figure it out," I said. "Mom, I love you," I added, "but I'm not your backup plan." I ended the call before he could respond. For a moment, my hands trembled. Not because I regretted it, but because I'd finally said the truth out loud. I set my phone down and stood up, feeling taller somehow. Outside, the afternoon sun poured across the porch. I stepped into it, letting the warmth settle into my bones. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting to be needed. I was waiting to be respected. And I had a feeling the real conversation was only just beginning. I didn't hear from them for the rest of that day. At first, the quiet felt unnatural, like when the power goes out and you keep expecting the lights to flicker back on. I cooked dinner for one and set only one plate on the table, no phone propped nearby, no half listening for a call that might come. Just me, the slow simmer of soup, and the sound of my own thoughts. That night, sleep didn't come easily, not because I felt guilty, but because my mind kept wandering backward through all the little moments that had led here. The just this once grocery runs, the vacations I helped fund but wasn't invited to, the jokes about how mom's good for it. None of it had started cruel. That's what made it dangerous. The next morning, I woke to sunlight and a single text from my daughter-in-law. "We need to talk." I stared at the words for a long time. Not "can we talk?" Not "when you're ready." Just "we need," a phrase that still assumed access. I replied with 3 words: "this afternoon." Here. She arrived with my son a few hours later. They stood on the porch together, dressed neatly, like they were going to an appointment. In a way, they were. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd balanced budgets and paid tuition and signed checks without question. My daughter-in-law crossed her arms. My son kept rubbing his hands together. "I don't understand why you did this so suddenly," she said. "It made us look terrible." That stung, not because it was said, but because it was said first. "I didn't do it suddenly," I replied calmly. "I did it after years." My son finally looked up. "Mom, we weren't trying to take advantage of you." I nodded. "I know. You were just used to me saying yes." That landed harder than I expected. My daughter-in-law uncrossed her arms. "We thought you didn't mind," she said. I smiled softly. "I taught you that." They were quiet now. I leaned back in my chair and spoke slowly, choosing each word the way you do when something matters. "I love you both, but I won't be spoken about like I'm a wallet. I won't be laughed at when something I've always provided suddenly isn't there." My daughter-in-law's voice wavered. "So what happens now?" That was the question, wasn't it? "Now," I said, "we reset." I slid a folder across the table. Inside were printouts, clear, simple. What I paid for, what I wouldn't anymore. No anger, no punishment, just boundaries written down so no one could pretend they didn't understand. My son swallowed hard. "This feels extreme." I met his eyes. Being invisible felt worse. They left not long after. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet heaviness in the air. When the door closed behind them, I sat alone at the table and let out a long breath. I didn't know if they would accept the change, but I knew I would. And for the first time, that was enough. The days after that conversation felt oddly suspended in time. No emergency calls, no sudden quick questions about payments or passwords. Just quiet, real quiet. The kind that gives you too much space to think, and yet somehow I didn't feel lonely. I felt unburdened. I took a walk one morning through the neighborhood I'd lived in for nearly 30 years and noticed things I'd stopped seeing. The cracked sidewalk near the corner, the old oak tree that still leaned like it was listening. I wondered how many years I'd rushed past my own life, trying to keep someone else's running smoothly. That afternoon, my son called. Not panicked this time. Careful. "Mom," he said, "can I come by?" "Alone?" I said yes. When he arrived, he didn't sit right away. He paced near the window, hands shoved deep into his pockets. the way he used to before asking for permission as a boy. I didn't realize how much we leaned on you, he admitted. Not just for money, for everything. I waited. Silence has a way of pulling truth out of people. When you blocked the cards, he continued, it scared us. Not because of the money, because it made us realize we didn't really know how things worked without you. I nodded slowly. That's what scared me too, long before the cards stopped working. He looked at me then, really looked. Why didn't you say something earlier? The question hurt more than the laughter ever had. I tried, I said softly. But every time I hinted, you reassured me. Every time I asked for less, you told me I didn't need to worry. Eventually, I stopped asking. He sat down across from me, shoulders slumping. We never meant to make you feel small. I know, I said, but love doesn't cancel impact. We talked for a long time that afternoon, not about money, but about habits, about how families slowly slip into roles without noticing, about how being the responsible one can turn into being the invisible one. Before he left, my son surprised me. I want to earn your trust back, he said, not by saying sorry, but by changing. I studied his face, searching for the boy I'd raised. He was still there, just older, and finally listening. I don't need perfection, I replied. I need respect. He nodded. Then I'll start there. After he left, I made myself dinner and sat down with a sense of calm I hadn't felt in years. Outside, the sky darkened and lights flickered on in neighboring houses, each family living their own quiet stories. That night, my phone buzzed once more. A message from my daughter-in-law. I've been thinking about what you said. I didn't realize how my words sounded until they were gone. Gone, not blocked, not taken, gone. I smiled to myself. Sometimes people don't hear you when you speak softly. They hear you when the silence finally does the talking. And mine had just begun to speak. Change doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in quietly, testing whether it's welcome. A week passed, then two. My phone stayed mostly still, and when it did ring, it wasn't about money. It was about weather, or a recipe, or a memory. My son suddenly wanted to revisit. Each call felt different, less rushed, more thoughtful, like someone learning a new language and choosing their words carefully. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law asked if she could stop by. I almost said no out of habit. Old instincts whispered, don't make things awkward. But I caught myself. Boundaries don't mean walls. They mean doors you choose when to open. She arrived carrying a small plant, her arms awkwardly wrapped around the pot, like a peace offering she wasn't sure would be accepted. I didn't know what to bring, she said. It's not an apology gift, just something living. I liked that. We sat at the kitchen table again. That table had seen so many versions of me, tired, hopeful, accommodating. Today, I felt present. I grew up watching my mother do everything for everyone, she began, paying, fixing, smoothing things over. People praised her for it. I thought that was love. I nodded. So did I, she looked at her hands. When you blocked the cards, I was angry, embarrassed. But then I realized something. I didn't even know what our life would look like without you stepping in. That's not your fault alone, I said gently. I made it easy. Her eyes met mine. I don't want to raise my children thinking women exist to absorb inconvenience. The words settled between us, heavy and sincere. I'm still learning, she continued, but I want things to be different. I believed her, not because of the words, but because of the pause that followed. The willingness to sit in discomfort instead of rushing past it. We talked about practical things after that. What I would help with, what I wouldn't. What support looked like when it was asked for, not assumed. No raised voices. No drama, just clarity. When she left, the plant sat on my windowsill, catching the afternoon light. I watered it slowly, feeling something unfamiliar bloom alongside it. Hope. That evening, I opened my old checkbook drawer and reorganized it, not out of fear, but out of intention. I labeled things clearly. I closed accounts I no longer wanted connected. I felt like I was reclaiming a small piece of myself with every tidy line. Later, my son called. We paid for lunch today, he said, half laughing. All of it, no issues, I smiled. I'm glad. There was a pause. I didn't realize how much confidence came from knowing you were always there. I am still here, I said, just not underneath everything. That night, I slept deeply again, not because everything was fixed, but because it was finally honest. And honesty, I was learning, is the strongest foundation a family can rebuild on. The real test didn't come with a phone call or a conversation. It came quietly, on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day that used to belong to everyone else's needs. My son called and asked if I wanted to join them for lunch. Not could I help, not were the cards okay, just an invitation. I hesitated longer than I expected. Old habits die slowly, and a part of me still wondered what the catch might be. But I went. The restaurant was modest, nothing fancy. When the check arrived, no one slid it toward me. My daughter-in-law reached for it without a word. My son didn't even look in my direction. Something loosened in my chest. As we ate, the conversation drifted to small things, work frustrations, a neighbor's new dog, the way the seasons seemed to be changing faster every year, ordinary talk. And yet, it felt extraordinary to be there simply as myself. At one point, my son said, "We're reworking our budget." I raised an eyebrow, not unkindly. He smiled sheepishly. Turns out convenience is expensive. We all laughed. Not the sharp laughter from that cafe weeks ago, but the kind that comes with humility. On the drive home, I realized how different my body felt. I wasn't tired. I wasn't bracing myself. I wasn't replaying the conversation in my head, wondering what I'd done wrong. That was new. A few days later, I received a handwritten note in the mail. Actual paper. My son's handwriting, uneven, earnest. "Thank you for trusting us enough to step back," it read. We didn't know how much we needed to grow. I folded the note carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as proof of victory, but as a reminder. Boundaries aren't punishments, they're invitations to do better. That evening, as I watered the plant my daughter-in-law had brought, I noticed a new leaf unfurling. Small, bright, stubbornly alive. I smiled. I had spent years believing my value was in what I provided: money, stability, solutions. But now I understood something deeper. My worth had never been in my usefulness. It was in my presence. And when that presence was no longer taken for granted, it felt like coming home to myself, slowly, gently, and right on time. I didn't realize how much of myself I'd been holding back until I started living without the constant weight of obligation. With the money questions settled, something unexpected happened. Space opened up, space to notice my mornings, space to sit with a book longer than planned, space to let the phone ring without feeling like I'd failed someone if I didn't answer right away. One afternoon, my daughter-in-law called, not about bills or plans, but about her mother. "She's always tired," she said quietly. "Always saying yes, even when it hurts. I see her doing what I did to you." I listened. "I don't want to repeat that," she continued, "but I don't know how to stop." I thought of all the years I'd smiled through discomfort, thinking patience was the same thing as love. "You stop by noticing when resentment shows up," I said. "That's usually your boundary asking to be heard." She was quiet for a moment. I never thought of it that way. Neither had I once. A week later, she invited me over for coffee. Just coffee. No errands attached. When I arrived, she'd set the table nicely. Not extravagantly, just with care. She asked my opinion on something small, then listened without interrupting. It felt like respect learning how to speak. That evening, my son stopped by too. He brought a stack of papers, budgets, plans, the practical side of growing up that no one likes to admit they've been avoiding. "We don't want you to feel like our safety net anymore," he said. "We want you to feel like our mother." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Those two things aren't the same." He nodded. "I know that now." After they left, I sat alone and reflected on how quietly things had shifted. No grand apologies, no dramatic scenes, just changed behavior, real change, the kind that sticks. I thought about the lunch where they laughed, the moment my card failed, the way embarrassment had burned my cheeks. That pain hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. Pain, I was learning, doesn't have to be wasted. Later that night, as I turned off the lights, I realized something else. I wasn't waiting anymore for gratitude, for permission, for things to go back to how they were. I didn't want back. I wanted forward. And for the first time in a long while, forward didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. There's a quiet moment that comes after everything settles, when you finally realize the ground beneath you is solid again. It happened for me on an ordinary morning. I was standing at the sink, watching sunlight catch the rim of my coffee mug, when my phone buzzed with a message from my son. Not a request, not an explanation, just a photo. It was a picture of a receipt from a grocery store, folded neatly beside a handwritten note. First month fully on our own. I smiled and set the phone down. Not because they didn't need me anymore, but because they no longer needed me that way. Later that week, we all met again for lunch. This time, it wasn't planned carefully or weighed down with meaning. It just happened. We talked about trivial things, traffic, a show we'd all watched, the neighbor's loud dog. When the check came, my daughter-in-law reached for it without ceremony. My son didn't glance at me. I realized then how much peace lives in the absence of expectation. On the drive home, I thought about how easily things could have gone differently. If I'd laughed along that day, if I'd paid quietly and gone home ashamed, if I'd convinced myself that love meant swallowing disrespect. None of this would have changed. That afternoon, I pulled out an old photo album. Pictures of my son as a toddler, his first bike, his crooked grin missing 2 teeth. I had loved him fiercely then, too. But love evolves. It has to, or it turns into something smaller than it should be. That evening, my daughter-in-law called. I just wanted to say thank you, she said. Not for the money, for the wake-up call. I leaned back in my chair. You didn't need a lesson, I replied. You just needed room to grow. She paused. I hope I can be that kind of mother someday. I closed my eyes, feeling something warm settle in my chest. You already are, you noticed. When we hung up, I sat quietly, listening to the house breathe around me. No tension, no waiting. I hadn't lost my family. I had found a new place within it, one where I was seen, not spent. And as I turned out the lights that night, I understood something that had taken me a lifetime to learn. Respect doesn't arrive when you ask for it softly. It arrives when you finally decide you deserve it. The last lesson didn't come from my son or my daughter-in-law. It came from myself. One evening, weeks after that lunch, I stood in front of the mirror, getting ready for bed, and noticed something small but unmistakable. I looked rested, not younger, not different, just rested, like someone who wasn't carrying other people's weight in her pockets anymore. For years, I had told myself I was being generous, that paying here and covering, there was just part of being a mother. But generosity, I finally understood, stops being kind the moment it costs you your voice. I thought back to that cafe, the laughter, the embarrassment, the way I stayed quiet because I didn't want to cause a scene. How many times had I chosen silence over self-respect and called it love? That day with the blocked cards wasn't about money at all. It was about visibility. My son came by a few days later, unannounced. He didn't look worried or rushed. He brought a loaf of bread from a bakery he'd discovered and held it out like a peace offering. I wanted to show you something, he said. We sat at the kitchen table, and he pulled out a notebook, pages of scribbles, crossed out numbers, plans. Their plans, not mine. We're okay, he said. Actually, we're better than okay. I smiled. I knew you would be." He hesitated, then added, "I'm proud of you." Those words caught me off guard. Parents hear many things from their children, but pride isn't always one of them, especially when it comes from a place of growth. "I learned something," he continued. "Love isn't about how much someone gives. It's about how much they're allowed to keep." When he left, I sat alone and let that sentence echo. Later that night, I wrote one final line in my notebook, beneath all the others I'd scribbled during this season of change. "I am not selfish for stopping. I am brave for choosing myself." If you're listening to my story and you recognize yourself in it, please hear this. You are not required to earn love by overgiving. You are not obligated to fund respect. And you are never too much when you finally say enough. Sometimes, the most powerful thing a woman, especially an older woman, can do is step back and let others learn what she has been quietly holding together all along. This is the final part, and if there's one thing I hope you carry with you, it's this: your value was never in what you paid for. It was always in who you are, even when you stop picking up the bill. Thank you for being here and listening. If this story touched you, please tap the like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from or sharing a small part of your own story.